From about age 2, humans begin asking why, and we continue to do so for the rest of our lives. When these questions concern unprovable metaphysical concepts, the answers are called faith, and those who are in agreement will develop religions to codify, preserve, and practice what they believe. Assuming your fantasy world is also inhabited by curious peoples, be they human or otherwise, faith and religion will arise, and if our own world provides any example, those beliefs will become major driving forces in how societies interact internally and externally. In this video, we will unpack the second half of this twofold concept, religion. Hi, my name is Jonathan Oldenburg. I am the author of the novel Tears from Iron, set in the fantastical world of Isfalleness. I've been world building for over 25 years, and the purpose of these videos is to share various tips and tricks I've discovered along the way, as well as a few pitfalls, all with the goal of helping you build fantasy worlds that are both rich and internally consistent. This is the second of 2 videos on establishing plausible faiths and religions in your fantasy worlds. The first focused on faith, that internal individual response to the unknowns of the universe. Now it is time to tackle religion, faith's corporate and external elements. As before, I want to address 2 concerns up front. Religions can be one of the most contentious aspects of human existence, so let's resist divisiveness here. I will be respectful of all religions, whether I share those beliefs or not, and I ask that you do the same in the comments. Let's extend each other grace and kindness as we grapple with these grand metaphysical questions. Second, we all bring our own perspectives to any topic. To help you understand mine, I will tell you that I am a devout Christian. I won't be proselytizing in this video. However, since Christianity is the religion I know best, I'll be using it for many of our real-world examples. As we shift our focus from individual faith to shared religion, I want to introduce 2 more pairs of key terms. The first pair is orthodoxy and orthopraxy. When I say orthodoxy, I mean small o orthodox, not Eastern Orthodoxy or Orthodox Judaism. Small o orthodoxy means right belief. In contrast, orthopraxy means right practice. The first concerns what an individual believes, his or her faith. The second is what an individual does as religious practice. We'll touch back on both of these after I introduce the next set of terms. These 2, devout and practitioner, I've made it myself for this discussion. A devout is a person who truly believes what the religion declares is true, often as defined by holy texts, creeds, the words of prophets, and so on. A practitioner, on the other hand, is someone who practices the external religious elements. They perform the various rites, prayers, festivals, etc., but don't believe in it internally. Some practitioners may adhere to a religion because their parents or friends do, society expects it, or any number of other reasons not necessarily linked to individual faith, including, quite simply, not really thinking about it much. Let's tie these 4 terms together. Someone who is devout will almost certainly value both orthodoxy, right belief, and also orthopraxy, right practice. A practitioner, on the other hand, has orthopraxy without orthodoxy. Since being devout is something internal, someone else can't be certain who is truly devout, or actually a practitioner, though their behavior may provide hints. Being devout doesn't mean being perfect as defined by that religion. Devout means having the belief, even if the individual fails to successfully adhere to it at all times. The motivations behind religious behavior aren't uniform. On one extreme, we may have a practitioner who thinks the whole thing is stupid, but participates in religious rites to avoid punishment. Or we may have a practitioner who takes some elements of the religion as a foregone conclusion, but doesn't really give it much thought. Having discussed the gradation of practitioner motivations here, we will set that complexity aside and focus on the core point, which will help us going forward. The defining feature all practitioners share is that they do not believe. We will see all these terms in more detail as we figure out how religions interface with society. Let's get into it. Until the pre-modern era, religion was integral to all societies in our world. Religions have had many practitioners as well as devout, but they have been a fundamental part of both groups' lives. Similarly, while it may be natural to think that more religions emphasize orthodoxy, religious belief, over orthopraxy, religious practice, this hasn't been true in all places and times. For some religions, the opposite was more important, as we will see. But however religion manifested in society, it generally performed at least one of 5 major functions, and frequently all 5. We will look at each of these in turn. They are: 1. Providing answers to cosmological questions. 2. Legitimizing secular authority. 3. Establishing cultural cohesion. 4. Establishing individual value. And 5. Establishing moral expectations. To be clear, in this conversation, we are looking at those elements that religion can offer society. We aren't talking about what faith offers the individual, which may be far more significant on a metaphysical level. If you're interested in that conversation, check out my other video. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here discussing how faith answers cosmological questions, beliefs related to the nature of the universe, because it was discussed in that same video. But looking at cosmology on the societal level, a shared religion offers its believers a common interpretation. It is a way of ensuring everyone within a culture is on the same page. If everyone shares a worldview, especially regarding root questions like, who is God, or are the gods? Why am I here? Why is there evil? And what happens when I die? Then that society will probably be more stable, or at least function within certain bounds of acceptable behavior, as we'll get into in a bit. Next, religion can provide legitimization for secular authority, that is, political institutions. Rule by divine appointment is a common theme in societies the world over, from the medieval divine right of kings to the Chinese mandate of heaven, or Roman emperors and Egyptian pharaohs who both claim direct links to divinity. If a ruler is considered to be divinely appointed, then overthrowing that ruler can also be seen as rebellion against the gods and bring fear and divine reprisal. That fear of divine consequences can lead members of society to violent opposition against anyone seen as defying the divine order. This doesn't prevent coups d'etats, insurrections, or rebellions, but it does make them much more dangerous to attempt. When one ruler is replaced by another, there is almost always going to be an attempt by the new potentate to establish ex post facto legitimacy to his rule by linking his reign to the predecessor he ousted. This may be through marrying into the prior dynasty, claiming or inventing blood ties, getting the priesthood on his side, and so on. Conversely, rulers perceived as defying the divine order might be erased from memory. The poster child of this is Pharaoh Akhenaten, who upset the entire religious and sociological order of ancient Egypt. He was isolated during his reign, and after his death, great efforts were made to remove all memory of him. The link of ruler to divinity can vary heavily depending on the society and the religion. Rome had a weaker tie because the emperors only became divine by the vote of the Senate after death. Contrast this to ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh was actually seen as divine. He was both secular and religious ruler of his people. Feudal Japan was similar because the emperor was a direct descendant of Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, even though through much of Japanese history he had almost no secular authority whatsoever. Imperial China provides another interesting example worth looking at. The Chinese emperor was not seen as a god. Rather, his rule was delegated by divine authority as the mandate of heaven. Various disasters could result in him being perceived as losing that mandate, and therefore religiously legitimizing rebellion. A new emperor after a civil war could claim he possessed the mandate of heaven and prove it through military success and societal prosperity. Viewed through a modern lens, it may be easy to chuckle at various ex post facto claims and label such rulers as practitioners because what they did was so politically expedient. While this is probably true in some cases, there are many examples to the contrary. One of the best of these is Alexander the Great. All signs point to him being incredibly devout. He believed in the power of the gods and was confident he was the son of Zeus. Alexander expended a great deal of effort to legitimize his rule, some of which were hardly necessary and others of which were extremely dangerous. For example, he traveled to the oracle at Siwa, deep in the Egyptian desert, a journey that had swallowed entire armies in the past, and used that visit to link Zeus to Ammon, and therefore as a divinity became the pharaoh of Egypt. Great history lesson, Jonathan, you might say, but what use is this for fantasy world building? When looking at any realm, consider what their dominant religion is and how that religion buoys up the powers that be. There are many ways this plays out, as we've seen, but the common threads are 1. Religion provides legitimacy to rule. 2. This legitimacy can provide for stable and long-lasting systems of government. 3. Upheavals against rule may bring religious backlash because the rebels are seen as acting against the gods. And 4. If a ruler is ousted, his replacement will seek to establish divine sanction to legitimize his rule. A single realm with a single religion, or at least a single dominant religion, can foster significant societal cohesion. It is, in many ways, the old world equivalent of modern forms of identity-based social cohesion, a sense of oneness founded on religion instead of nation, ideology, or other shared identity. There are numerous ways religion can achieve this, so I'll just focus on a few. Shared communal practices such as rituals, services or rites, and festivals, holidays, create a sense of belonging. They can even break down other barriers such as class or wealth, at least in this one microcosm of society. Such acts can morph into a shared identity, which is also to say a sense of us. We'll talk about how all of this might be used later, but for now the point is that this can combine a group of otherwise disparate people with a sense of unity. A perfect example here is the rapid unification of previously warring Arab tribes under Islam, creating both religious and political cohesion. As another example, the idea of us is surprisingly common in group names. I'm throwing up a partial list on the screen now that spans every continent across a huge swath of history, where a sense of common identity resulted in tribes calling themselves some variation of the people. While this doesn't necessarily require a single shared religion, religious practices likely played a significant role in shaping these shared identities. This concept of cultural cohesion also works in societies that weren't 100% homogeneous. In these circumstances, the majority religion offers all the benefits we've discussed already. Minority religions may offer the same, but also in a broader sense create unique cultural niches. Let's look at two examples. The first is medieval Europe, which, other than the eastern edges, was almost entirely Christian, with a very small Jewish minority. Many Jews filled roles barred to Christians, such as lending and interest, which made them critical to trade and finance, and unfortunately sometimes the target of persecution. Our second example is the classical Islamic civilization, which was about 90% Muslim, plus a combined population of about 10% Christians and Jews. Individuals of these religions were allowed to continue to practice their beliefs, but only privately. They also filled critical roles in Islamic society. For example, the sudden conquest of much of the Near East caused a huge diaspora of Christians and Jews, resulting in many of those who remained behind having excellent trade contacts to the wider world. When considering your fantasy world, ask yourself how religion manifests externally. Are there regular festivals or public rites? Are people expected to attend church or temple at certain regularity? What religious holidays are there, and what do they celebrate? These practices can foster cohesion, whether within a single realm as ancient Rome, or spanning multiple realms that share the same core beliefs like medieval Europe. In both cases, a sense of us emerges, very likely a sense of them as well. Also consider minority religions. Do they fill cultural niches that help that realm flourish, and perhaps become targets of wrath in bleak times? We've talked about faith for the individual and religion for society, but what about religion for the individual? As we've already touched on, religion has the potential to break through strata of society, or to reinforce those divides. Hinduism actually illustrates both. Some Hindu traditions emphasize spiritual equality, while others reinforce social hierarchy. The first example gives us a hint we can build upon. Religions that break through societal strata will likely provide incentives for the faithful after death, and not just in this life. I discussed this concept in great detail in the faith video, so I won't belabor the point here. Essentially, in societies built on economic foundations of slavery, serfdom, or some other form of human commodification, religion can establish value to the soul itself, making humans, or other fantasy races, something more than economic or political capital. In these circumstances, the valuing of the soul often begins within the same religion, for instance between serfs and their lord. but it can gradually extend to include other beliefs. This second stage is typically very slow, making it uncommon in ancient or medieval societies. Let's look at two examples. I've picked them because they not only reflect this concept, but also demonstrate the nature of unintended, or at least partially unanticipated, consequences. The first of these is the medieval Crusades. One of their many causes was internal to Christendom. The papacy was concerned about the endemic violence between Christians in the petty wars that practically defined early modern Europe, and sought to redirect that martial vigor outward, and kill two birds with one stone, as it were. Thus they pointed knights toward recovering the Holy Land. This did reduce internal conflict, but the plan was imperfect, as exemplified by the Fourth Crusade's sack of Christian Constantinople. Our second example relates to slavery. Systemic raiding, targeting the Slavs in particular, was rampant from all directions, including Europe, West Asia, and the Middle East, dating back at least to the 6th century. So much so that the word slave derives from Slav in over 20 languages. Interestingly, the captured slaves weren't used in Europe itself, as that would have disrupted the manorial economy. But that's a tangent for another day. The point is that in the 5th century, the papacy declared that slavers from Christian Europe could no longer prey upon the Slavic peoples for slaves, because the Slavs had converted. Once again, the plan worked. But the unfortunate consequence was a shifting of slaver activities from Eastern Europe to Africa. It wouldn't be until the 18th and 19th century that Christian abolitionists managed to convince the British Empire to abandon the prosperous slave trade, ban it in all of their territories, and gradually coerce the rest of the world to do the same. Both of these provide examples of religion giving value to life and seeking to protect the faithful. The latter slavery example also shows how this can gradually extend to protect peoples of different religions too. But like I said, it can take a long time. So let's take these real-world examples and contemplate its significance for fantasy world building. If you introduce religions that value all souls, then those institutions are likely to protect people across all social strata. This probably won't eliminate class divisions. After all, such concepts usually have unequal application. Emphasis may vary from one religious leader to another, specific internal or external political, social, or economic events, and so on. But at a minimum, it is likely to be codified in doctrine. The result will probably be greater protections, at least for those of the same religion. Lastly, religion can provide moral expectations for the people of a society. We've already talked about this a bit when discussing slavery and loaning money at interest. The breadth and depth can vary, but it is almost always present depending upon the nature of the religion and the society that believes in it. Literacy, or at least the existence of a written language, can significantly affect this, since societies without writing must rely on oral traditions to preserve moral expectations. Judaism has a highly codified framework, including caring for the poor, marital conduct, dietary laws, and adherence to specific sacrifices. Confucianism emphasized piety, loyalty, and benevolence. Norse paganism lacked literacy and codification, but demanded honor, oath-keeping, hospitality, and vengeance. The Aztec religion reinforced obedience to authority, courage in war, proper sacrifices, and so on. As you think about religion in your fantasy worlds, consider what sort of expectations it imparts to its believers, both individually and societally. These expectations will almost certainly vary depending upon the nature of the deity. Mars or other gods of war probably won't be big into turning the other cheek, but could include concepts like courage, honorable treatment of the fallen, obedience to war leaders, among other martial virtues. There may also be ritualized reinforcement of moral behavior through public or private punishments, rites, confession, and similar practices. These expectations could have huge ramifications on societal behaviors. While this stretches back toward faith more than religion, consider also what the consequences of violating these moral codes might be, and whether those consequences only apply to the individual or society as a whole. If it is societal, as in ancient Rome, the repercussions for minority religions seen as violating these codes could be very severe, especially in times of crisis. One example here is Christianity, which Emperor Nero made illegal in AD 64. And remained in that classification until Constantine in 313. That being said, the persecution of Christians varied heavily depending upon circumstances. It had been rather quiescent for an extended period when, in AD 249, Emperor Decius ramped up the persecutions in response to military disaster and plague, because it was perceived that the empire had lost divine favor. Disaster, upheaval, famine, and plague tend to reinforce religious perspectives, or more rarely, result in widespread conversions to a new faith. Okay, so we've discussed the 5 key elements that religion could bring to society. Now let's look at how religion can be organized within society. When trying to figure out how complex a religious structure should be, here are 3 rules of thumb. 1. How complex is the surrounding society? Compare, for example, Imperial Rome with its numerous institutions to a rural Germanic tribe. 2. How complex is the faith itself? Religions in literate societies have a much greater capacity to record and preserve beliefs, doctrinal rulings, and theological writings than those reliant upon oral tradition. 3. Though this one is much more situational, geographical scale may induce complexity, but only if centralization needs to be maintained. The size of the medieval Christian world was definitely a factor in its complexity, but it wasn't nearly as important for Roman paganism. Despite significantly higher literacy and a more centralized political structure, Roman paganism was very reliant on local leadership. Let's take a look at both extremes. The ancient Norse had no distinct priestly caste at all. Religion was embedded in daily life, law, and politics, but had no centralizing church. What organization did exist rested in the hands of local chieftains. Christianity, especially Catholicism, exemplifies the opposite extreme. The Catholic Church is very hierarchical in structure, centered on the Pope, with cardinals, bishops, and monks, among others, handling a vast array of church functions. Yet Christianity also includes many Protestant faiths that are simpler in structure, including at the far end non-denominational churches that may have only a single pastor. In your fantasy world, therefore, consider the complexity of both the society and the faith, along with a geographic reach when deciding exactly how it is structured within that culture. Remember that the same religion shared between 2 different realms might vary in specific structure, or it may be the same. Buddhism shows how one belief can vary across different countries, while medieval Catholicism's single hierarchy stretched across Western Christendom. Linked to religious structure is the concept of religious doctrine. This tends to be extremely important in religions that offer their faithful metaphysical boons, specifically fate after death. But it can also matter in beliefs narrowed to this world alone, such as Roman paganism. Doctrine is a means of answering grand cosmological and religious questions with additional clarity. It often emerges in response to heresies and schisms. A heresy, simply put, is a faith, perhaps even a religion, that purports to be the same belief, but has a different interpretation on at least one key issue. This may put their adherents at metaphysical risk, and/or place the physical realm in danger of divine retribution. A schism can occur when an interpretation condemned as heretical nevertheless persists. In some cases, the wound may at least be partially mended, even after violent dispute. An example here is Christian Catholics and Protestants, many of whom today acknowledge the beliefs they share more than what divides them, despite some stages of the Reformation being quite violent. Let's look at heresies, schisms, and their impacts on society. We'll begin by exploring motivation. I can think of at least 3 major causes. The first rises from a debate over doctrinal issues. This usually transpires between 2 groups of devout who disagree on some matter of theology. A great example is Arian Christianity, which held that Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father. A common outcome for such disputes is some form of council of religious leaders. In this case, the result was the Nicene Creed, which provided an orthodox, small o, doctrinal clarification condemning Arianism. A schism resulted, with some Germanic tribes adhering to Arianism for centuries. The second impetus may emerge over church practices rather than heresy. This almost certainly requires someone who is devout to bring forward the issue, but those that are addressed in the institution may include devout and/or practitioners. To be fair, the initial disputing devout may also be joined by opportunistic practitioners. An example here is Martin Luther and the 95 Theses he nailed to the church in Wittenberg, Germany. His goal was to reform the church, but the final outcome was schism that resulted in various Protestant religions. But the Reformation was exploited by many opportunists who took advantage of the religious disputes to pursue purely worldly ambitions. A prime example from the 30 Years' War is Catholic France's support of Protestant forces against their arch-rival, the Catholic Habsburgs. A third cause for schism emerges purely from secular agendas, and therefore is probably driven by a practitioner. King Henry VIII's break with Catholicism during the Reformation exemplifies this. His motive was a divorce that the papacy wouldn't grant. There was no doctrinal issue at stake, and the Church of England during his reign was very similar to the Catholic Church. In this, we see the potential for religion to take on secular significance outside of its fundamental faith-based purposes. This is because these matters reach to the very heart of the human condition. The resulting intensity can be combined with religious elements we already discussed, like legitimizing secular authority and establishing cultural cohesion, and be harnessed for other motives. In a world-building sense, opportunists may seek to manipulate existing religions to support their secular aims. Religion isn't the only tool in their arsenal, but the others are out of scope for this video. So what does this offer us as world builders? I've mentioned at various points that one challenge of religion in fantasy worlds is that the inhabitants often have more perfect knowledge than we do in our world. Introducing heresies and schisms is one mechanism to overcome what otherwise might be a unity of belief, and create fractures between the peoples of your world. This may result in separate courses of societal and religious development. If your world has multiple religions, or even conflicting interpretations of a single religion, then that world, like ours, will experience religious conflict. Some will manifest in outright war, like those which racked the Balkans between Christian and Islamic armies, particularly between the 14th and 17th centuries. Others may manifest when realms with a single dominant religion take direct interest in the welfare of co-religionists in a different realm. We see this in Russia's protective interests of Eastern Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire during the 19th century. It usually was diplomatic in nature, but could flare into war. Even when there isn't an external champion for a minority religion, interesting outcomes can emerge as realms grapple with what to do with those groups within their borders. Classical Islamic civilization's treatment of Christians and Jews, as we already discussed, is a good example here. Let's look at Rome, where this dynamic played out differently. Roman paganism was highly concerned with orthopraxy. Remember, that means religious practices. They were far less concerned with orthodoxy, religious beliefs. Roman society viewed anyone who didn't perform the required rites as threats to the state because they risked bringing down the wrath of the gods on everyone. Therefore, most minority religions and cults were tolerated, so long as they performed the expected rites too. Christians, however, believed that these practices were anathema, refused, and were persecuted. When looking at your world, think about each of your societies. What religions exist there? Which are dominant and which are minorities? Are the belief structures largely compatible, such as Roman paganism and many minority cults? Are they partially compatible, like classical Islam and his view of other people of the book, Jews and Christians? Or are they utterly incompatible, like Roman paganism and Christianity? The answer here will determine the level of integration and conflict. Just like with the video on faith in fantasy worlds, I should warn of similar danger on the religious side of things. In this case, I have two warnings. The first I've alluded to before but deserves more discussion. That is, confusing the external rule builder perspective on religion with the internal devout perspective. To some degree, practitioner may apply here too, but I want to focus on the devout. When we think about religion, it is important to remember that the purpose of a faith, the internal belief, is not religion. Religion is a corporate manifestation of that faith, including its structure, how it interweaves with society, and how society perceives it. While a practitioner may be drawn to a religion for non-religious motives, such as fame, popularity, rousing believers to a cause, and so on, a devout person won't be. A devout person doesn't decide what they believe based on what the religion offers, but rather what the faith itself offers. Incentive. This could either be some benefit given by God or gods in this world, such as good crops, success in battle, etc., and or the fate of the soul in the next life, such as heaven versus hell. Let's look at this in a little more detail. Someone who is devout performs the orthopraxic elements of his religion because he believes it is true. This is just as relevant in religions like Roman paganism, which focused on orthopraxy over orthodoxy, because they believed those religious acts were critical elements of keeping the gods happy. Put another way, the religion also served an underlying faith. In your world building, you will sometimes need to take an external view in order to weave everything together, but you will also need to shift from time to time to the internal perspective to verify that the religion you've created is serving the beliefs of the faithful, the devout. If it isn't, you no longer have religion, but a secular corporation more in common with the Hanseatic League, the British East India Company, Boeing, or Walmart. A religion made up solely of practitioners can't exist because there is no underlying faith. If you've fallen into this trap, what do? The simple answer is to add devout. Make sure the faith offers some true incentive that would draw believers to it. This dovetails with my faith video where I unpack this more in detail. If you're struggling here, it may help. The second warning has become nearly chronic in fantasy worlds of the past 20 years, if not longer. In worlds inspired by antiquity or the Middle Ages, religions are introduced as important elements and are portrayed in alignment with those periods, except for two fatal flaws. First, protagonists are not only areligious or anti-religious, but hold beliefs indistinguishable from 21st century atheism in a world with no foundation for such a perspective. This is magnified when these worlds have physically present and active gods. Atheism as it exists today did not emerge until the Enlightenment, 2 centuries after the Middle Ages. Prior to that, there were skeptics, such as the Epicureans of ancient Greece and the Carvaka of India. But these were extremely rare, often elite, and lived in worlds dominated by powerful religious frameworks. The protagonists we see in modern fantasy are open about their views and disrespectful or flippant toward their society's beliefs, something that would almost certainly bring severe consequences. In Imperial Rome, they would likely end up as a lion's lunch. They might be executed in medieval Europe as well, but at a minimum would be excommunicated, socially ostracized, and denied most economic opportunities and legal protections. I don't say this to disparage atheism. As I said at the outset of this video, I respect everyone's efforts to try and understand the world and their place in it. The point here is that transplanting a modern worldview into ancient or medieval societies creates cognitive dissonance that shatters plausibility, especially if the very deities the protagonist rejects are present and openly active in that world. The second part of this is that everyone adhering to a religion is portrayed as either evil or idiotic. This doesn't hold water. Certainly there have been idiots and villains in every belief. But the universal application of religion equals evil or religion equals idiot is not only insulting, but another source of cognitive dissonance. The number of brilliant scholars who were devout Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and so on is enormous. So what is the solution, especially if you are an atheist who wants to explore your own beliefs in your work? For your protagonists, simply have them be a practitioner of the local religion without being devout. There is widespread evidence that this has existed throughout our world's history. Alternatively, you could explore the Epicureans or the Carvaka to get ideas on how these skeptics interacted with their societies. A 21st century mindset doesn't fit unless you've built a philosophical bridge to get there, in which case the societies will likely have moved beyond ancient or medieval attitudes as well. For the devout of your world, it's fine to have the occasional villain or idiot in the bunch. You can find these in any group. But for the rest, make sure the incentives that draw them into their faith are both plausible and sufficiently rewarding. Try to put yourself in their mindsets and interpret what might move them to make the decisions they do. Similar techniques would work if you're a religious world builder, with a protagonist holding your beliefs in a society with a conflicting faith. Alternatively, you could simply minimize the role of religion in your world building. As we come to the end of this video, let's address this question alongside a couple others. one of which could be the most amusing creative element of religion in fantasy. But first, the simple reality is that you can give religion as much or as little attention as you'd like. That's the truth of all world building. In my inaugural video of this series, What is Your Intent and Scope?, I talk about balancing your purposes. Most of us don't simply build worlds for the construction itself, but for some larger purpose, novels, games, etc. The more time you spend developing your world, the less time you have for your true aim. Because religion has such huge ramifications, I would encourage you to give it at least a little attention, but it doesn't have to be much. Let's use Tolkien as an example. He was an incredibly devout Catholic, yet how much religion is there in his stories? It exists in Middle-earth. You see it in great detail in the Silmarillion, because that is a work devoted to cosmology and cosmogony, among other things. But in his novels, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, religion and faith only manifest subtly, such as Frodo evoking Elbereth Gilthoniel on Weathertop, sailing to the Undying Lands at the end, or the overall theme of a eucatastrophe. If you do spend a lot of time developing religion in your world, especially if it is similar to what you believe, I have one final warning for you. Beware becoming too preachy. Lecturing your audience is far more likely to annoy and alienate them than engage them. Let the religions you develop integrate with your world naturally. This will result in far more compelling themes than you could ever achieve by heavy-handed preaching. So how about that amusing creative element? I'm talking about swear words. In our world, swear words generally come in two categories. One has to do with bodily functions, and the other has to do with religion. What oaths and curses might emerge from the beliefs in your world? In my world of Isfalnus, my favorite is Henji's blood on the bridge, which refers to the death of the goddess Henji upon a great bridge during an ancient war against a dark foe. Think of this as another outlet for your imagination, and a way to add cultural depth without exposition. Okay, we've done it! We've navigated the complex and potentially divisive topic of religion. I have to confess that this has been one of the toughest scripts I've ever had to write, because of its sensitivity to so many of us, its extreme complexity, and the significance it has on society and culture. It is my hope that I was successful in this endeavor. As you look at integrating religion into your world, ask yourself what functions it fills in society. What structure does it have? Is it fairly simple or complex? Is there any deviation in doctrine, calls for reformation, or opportunistic schisms that create conflict? How do different religions interact with each other, both within a single realm and between realms? And be wary. Ensure that the religions you create are internally plausible with genuine, thoughtful adherence. Finally, have fun with it. Religion is a tough topic, but it is interesting with broad ramifications. If you enjoy this content and would like to see more discussion on the pillars of quality world building, please give this video a like and subscribe so you'll get the next update. I would love to hear your thoughts and challenges in introducing religions into your world. Please leave a comment. And until next time, goodbye, happy world building, and have a good day. For the people of a society, for the people of a society, for the people of a society, oh my goodness, of a society, for the people of a society, society, of a society, oh my goodness, for the people of a society, oh my goodness, for the people of a society, for the people of a society, for the people of a society, for the people of a society. Oh my God, come on. I'm so tired of saying society. Oh.